meeting that I'll introduce Rob shortly is on revitalising democracy. So looking at possibilities for electorate level mobilisations to achieve better parliamentary representation. So before we get Rob to sort of start the conversation, I'd just like to acknowledge the country that we're on, and all of us are on different country. But here in Canberra, I'm on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country. So I just want to pay respects to the traditional owners and the custodians and the ancestors and the leadership in the present and emerging future. And just to, given that we're talking about democracy and we're standing on country, it's probably good for us to all realise that the land that we're on here in Australia was taken without consent and without a treaty and without compensation. So it's probably difficult for us to really get a strong democracy until we learn how to integrate all those voices. So just in honouring that, Rob, I might invite you to just explain a little bit of your story of your life and how you got into writing this paper and developing these ideas and your background. And then we can sort of start your presentation. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I'll do that. I'll also pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, which is where the people whose land I'm on at the moment. Now, I want to stress that I'm doing this just as a citizen, a voter. I don't have any particular claim to expertise. But I have had a career in two areas. I'm currently retired from paid work, but I don't sort of see myself as retired. I've been in various jobs in the community sector, things like community education, recreation, working with disability groups, working for the Salvation Army for a while, I've also been an academic at a number of universities, but in the last part of my career, it was at Curtin University. My wife and I were in Western Australia for a few years, and then I continued to work for Curtin when I came back here. And it wasn't so much in lecturing, it was in desktop research and writing, and also in an action research project, which was part of a national research project on low carbon living. And I was organising groups in the Yarra area where they help one another, the members of these groups help one another to reduce their carbon footprints. And my areas in academia have been politics and sociology and community development and sustainability. So they do relate to what we're going to be talking about today. And also I've had a bit of experience with the Greens, with Get Up. Many years ago I was a member of the ALP, but I've also been a very keen observer of politics, a reader about politics, talk to a lot of people about politics, think about it. And so what I've come up with here really comes out of all those strands of my life. But as I say, I don't claim to be an expert, but I'm very interested in getting involved with other people and doing something about this. And what I've noticed is that
actually, Rob, just before you, I think you're going to kick into starting now, are you?
Yeah.
I might just sort of set a few things up. So sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Just to let everybody know that we're going to record this workshop or this conversation. You'll see a little button up on the top left of your screen to notice about that. We won't share this with anybody until everybody approves of it. So we'll engage in a process with you after this about your concerns about it. But if you do have any concerns, you can contact me or CAPaD secretary, which is the email address that you would have got for this session. The other thing is when we're talking, we're quite a big group. It's probably good to put yourself on mute so that if your kids come in or the dog starts barking So the mute button is down on the bottom left of the screen, and you can switch that off. The video camera is also there. You can turn that on and off if you need to, blow your nose or do something that so you don't want everyone else to see. So that's there. I'd also encourage you, because we're quite a large group and we won't get a chance for everyone to introduce themselves, if you want to make any comments or add any suggestions, use the chat button, which is down on the bottom in the middle of the black bar at the bottom of the screen, and it opens up a little pop-out window to the right, and you can just type some text in there. We might use that for questions, and also Rob wants to run this in a way where we build on his framework and look at how this could work not only across Australia, but also in our own electorates. So that's probably enough to get us started with the logistics. So back over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, so just as a initial question, who actually had a look at the paper that was on the website? Just so some people have. Okay, what I might do is just quickly run through the idea, because it also, even if you've read the paper, it kind of reacquaints us with some of the points that I've made. I start by talking about how, as you all know, there's been a huge loss of faith in Australian democracy, and it's certainly less well functioning than most of us would like it to be. So the question then is, how can we improve it? And I'm thinking particularly, how can ordinary citizens be involved in improving it? And it seems to me that it's a very timely opportunity to do this now, because of the existing health and economic crisis that we're facing and will face for quite some time into the future, particularly an economic crisis, even if we get the health crisis under control. And politicians have shown that they can do things differently if the circumstances require them to, both in terms of policies and in terms of behaving in a different way. And people are starting to ask, what's Australia going to be like? What's politics going to be like in the post-pandemic era? So I think it's a really good time to be exploring this kind of possibility. Up until, as I say in the paper, up until now, I think there have been two main ways in which ordinary citizens have engaged in political activity, and one is through specific issue campaigning on whatever issue: climate change, refugees, inequality, housing, wage levels, whatever it is. And the other one is through joining political parties. And I think my belief is that both of those have really diminished in their effectiveness. I think with specific issue campaigns, the parties, particularly conservative parties, have begun to see that the people who engage in these campaigns are never going to vote for them anyway. So they can just ride it out and not particularly accede to their demands. And with parties, we know that party membership has been diminishing over decades, and it's now very low. And anecdotally, the experience of people getting into parties can be often quite frustrating. And so, they often don't feel that they've achieved much by joining, particularly the main parties, the larger parties. So the question is, what then can we do about this? Now, I think Indi has really highlighted another option, and that is that there can be more activity at the electorate level. Groups of people can get together, not just on specific issues, that's important too, but also on the broader issue of how they want themselves to be represented in federal parliament and federal politics. Indi has opened up, possibilities in relation to how MPs are selected at the pre-selection stage and at the election stage. the kinds of people who are elected, hopefully more people who are more representative of their constituency, how that representation happens in terms of the communication, etc., between the MP and the voters, so that it's almost like a partnership, really. Although that doesn't mean that there won't be difference, and you won't want to replace that MP with another MP at some stage. But it's a bit like current discussion about health. We're all told that we're responsible for our own health as much as the people working in health services. We have to be active participants in maintaining our health. And I think also we need to be active participants at the electorate level in maintaining some involvement in politics, so that we're there along with the MP to make sure that a good representation is happening. But it doesn't have to involve everyone. In something like only about 1%, 1.5% of the voters have been involved in the Voices for Indi campaigns. But that has had an enormous effect, because they have then worked through their networks to influence other people. So when we look at what happens in each electorate now, we see that the process, for example, of pre-selection is very opaque. People don't really understand how it is that these people are selected. The first time they often see their name is on the ballot paper. So they see themselves as having little real choice in the selection of the candidates. There's very little information often about the candidates. The candidates come from a narrow range of occupations and backgrounds. Very few constituents actually have much involvement in the process of representation at the electorate level, or have contact with their MPs. In fact, I discovered that only 61% can name their MP. Sorry, 61% can't name their MP. So, it's only a minority of people who actually know who their MP is. And also there are lots of safe seats, and that means those are seats where MPs feel that they don't have to necessarily extend themselves. They may care about their constituents, but they don't, for political reasons, really need to extend themselves to represent people as well as they might. Another problem with this situation is that many MPs have what I call little political capital when they go in to do politics. Because I think politics is an incredibly difficult and complex area. But when they go in there, if they don't have the respect of their MP, of their constituents, if they're not known by them, if the constituents don't feel that they've actually selected this person, then they're not given any slack. They're not allowed to learn on the job. It's likely that if they make too many mistakes, they'll be kicked out on their ear, and that's a bit of a tall order, really. And so I think it would work better if we had people in representing us who we respected, who we knew, who were prepared to make difficult decisions, even if we didn't agree with them all the time. There's not good two-way communication between the MPs and their electorates. There's something like, I was working it out, in the average electorate, there's about 110,000 voters and 166,000 people. So it's incredibly difficult for an MP to be able to represent all of those people adequately. And so it would work much better if ordinary people were helping to channel concerns and issues to the MP so that they could do a better job of representing all those people. As a result of the fact that there's not enough input coming from the constituents, I think you could say that MPs are over-influenced by parties and under-influenced by constituents. They see themselves as in their everyday political activity, they see themselves as representing their parties, those that are members of parties, more than they see themselves as representing constituents. And so the whole of that situation has, I think, contributed to the loss of faith in politics, and the fact that it's, we're not experiencing particularly good governance. I mean, it's up and down, and we've seen that there's been some very good decisions in the pandemic by the government that many of us might not have held out much hope for some months ago. So anyway, what I'm advocating is starting a group or a project that would help put an idea out to people in different electorates and help those people who want to start a group in their electorates where there's interest to get mobilisations going to address these matters. Like what happened in Indi, but I'm not suggesting that all of those electorates would be intent on getting rid of their MP and putting up a community-backed independent. I mean, that was certainly warranted in Indi because of the deficiencies of the existing candidate, but there are many other options, and I want to go on and discuss those. Well, in fact, what we can do now is I'll just bring up this sheet. I just sort of made a list of objectives. So I hope you'll all be able to see this when I bring it up. There we go. So what I'm suggesting is that the goal of the project is to encourage and support groups of constituents in electorates to mobilise for better representation, initially at the federal level. It could happen at the state and local government level, but I think the federal level is where people are focused and where there's most discontent. And the sort of things that those groups could engage in is, first of all, they'd need to accumulate and articulate constituents' views. So, the kitchen table conversation seems to be a good model for that. So you get people together in small groups, you then draw out all of the conclusions from those into some sort of report. You can have other forums as well on specific issues. And so you get a feeling of what people really want in terms of values, their concerns, their hopes, policy priorities, expectations of their MP, etc. And then you disseminate these in the electorate to the MP, to other candidates who are running for office, to the media, to whoever wants to see them. And you start to try and generate some conversations with the MP and candidates about those, get their response, get some dialogue going. And the aim would be to improve ongoing two-way communications with MPs and candidates. You could also research candidates' policies, their records, their backgrounds, anything that's relevant to their electability, and disseminate these information to constituents so that they would be better informed when voting. And I'm not sure about the next bit, but I've also said, and possibly include in this the evidence base of these policies and how closely they align with policy priorities that have been articulated by constituents through the kitchen table conversations and so forth. There could be a process of monitoring the MP's, whoops, I've gone the wrong way, monitoring the MP's performance. And I'm just, there we go. Including their parliamentary voting record, communications with constituents, actions on behalf of constituents, etc. So that they know that the electorate is more aware of what they're doing. You don't have to be particularly cruel about it. You can do it in a fair way, as you might in any job that people do. Encouraging greater candidate diversity, so that right now there's a few occupations that dominate. the backgrounds of people who get into politics, and would be good to diversify that, but also diversify it in terms of gender and ethnicity and so forth. Seek to persuade parties to allow constituents who are not party members to have a say in party pre-selections, because I mean that has happened on selected occasions in Australia. It's happened in Britain. It's really the basis, I suppose, of the primary system in the US. Not that there's a lot of features of the US politics that you would want to emulate, but I think that's one that has a little bit going for it. If necessary, you could nominate and campaign for a community-endorsed independent candidate if the candidate was particularly, if the existing MP was particularly unsuitable. And I think that this would be a choice for each electorate, that there should be a particular focus on looking at reforms to our democratic processes, because I think reforming those, things like a donations reform, getting a sort of a federal ICAC with teeth, better managing the revolving door of politicians going into work for peak lobby groups and so forth, you know, dealing with those problems is very much the key to having the space to implement better policies in other areas. And it's very hard to get people really steamed up about those, but you could, if they were explained within the context of a whole grassroots-based mobilisation. So that's really the list that I am putting to you as a list of possibilities, and individual electorates would sort of decide themselves which of those to adopt. So that's they're the main things that. Wait a minute. No, I've got a few more things here. Related to this, one of the things that impressed me about the campaign in Indi is how they had a focus on much more civilised behaviour. People were encouraged to be respectful in discussion, to focus on policies and not on people, to look at positive possibilities. And I think that's something that could be encouraged through these mobilisations. And that they also tried to steer clear of the culture wars. They didn't talk in terms of left and right. That doesn't mean they were centrist. They just didn't put themselves on that spectrum, or conservative or progressive, but they just talked about what participants wanted based on the values that were expressed through the kitchen table conversations. They also focused on making engagement a fun and social activity, because that's a way that you can get a larger number of people involved. There were many people who were involved in that campaign who hadn't been involved in any sort of campaigning before. In terms of how this project could play out, I would see that you would need a central group that was generating material, assisting people in individual electorates through phone conversations, through Zoom conversations, whatever, or visits when the time comes. That you could produce material on how to run a kitchen table conversation, the sort of goals you might have, pointers on strategic pointers, could be in print or video. You could be available for discussion, as I said, and people doing things in different electorates could also link in together. So that's the idea. I'm keen now to throw it open to general questions and general discussion. Oh, one more thing I might mention. In discussions I've had with people so far, one question has been, should this idea just be disseminated broadly to people in any electorate who want to go with it, or should there be some process of targeting particular seats where say the MPs are particularly not doing a job, let's say? And I believe the more I think about it, the more I think it should be the first one, because if this group got into the business of nominating which MPs should be focused on, it would start to develop, I think, a bit like the Get Up campaign in the last federal election. And it would be probably, I would guess, the ones that would be targeted would be right-wing MPs in most cases. And it would sort of start to look like an episode of the culture wars. I don't think that a group should be making those judgments, the sort of central group should be making those judgments about what happens in the individual electorates. I think one of the keys to the authenticity of the Indi experience was that it was a local campaign and it was the local people who were making the decisions. And I think that that would be important to maintain. And also there's many things to be gained, even if you have a reasonably good MP, there's many things to be gained by trying to enter into a kind of partnership with the electorate, between the electorate and the MP, to make things work better. So anyway, I've said too much. I've realised I've spoken for about 25 minutes, which is more than I intended. So now, before I say anything else, I'll ask you, what do people think of this proposal? I mean, what thoughts come to mind? Is it feasible? Is it pie in the sky? What do you think?
Well, can I suggest a process for this? There's 20 of us here,
Yeah.
and I'm happy to be a coordinator of people speaking. One intention would be to make sure if everyone wanted to speak, that they could. So as well as engaging with Rob's material, you could either ask a question or build on what he's saying and what's becoming alive in you with these ideas as you get a chance to speak. So some of us like to reflect a bit before we speak, so I won't force you to speak, but maybe if you've got a question or a comment, you could put it into the chat box or just put your hand up like that, and if I can see it, I'll invite you to make your comment or question, and then Rob can respond, and maybe other people might want to respond as well, and then we'll go back to asking another question or a comment, and we'll just sort of work up the ideas as a dialogue between 20 of us here. We'll probably do this for about half an hour. So if you feel like you're not getting your voice through, type it into the chat box as well. And if there's any ideas that come up and you want to reinforce it, just say you support those ideas. So we get a bit of a sense of our collective mood about these things. So who would like to kick us off, making us comment? Okay, that's Dick, is it? Off you go. You're muted, Dick.
You got it.
That's it.
Oh, yeah, I think I'm unmuted now.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
I think Rob's proposals are very good. They work very well in Indi because there were two, well, initially Kathy McGowan and then subsequently the other independent were very good candidates. I don't see it working particularly well in House of Representatives where members of major parties are bound by their party lines. It might work better in the Senate, but I despair that this method will work very well in the House of Representatives. In the ACT Legislative Assembly, where we have an election coming up later this year, the modified Hare-Clark system is weighted very heavily against independents getting elected. It's almost impossible to get an independent up in the ACT Legislative Assembly, unfortunately.
Thanks, Dick. Okay, Martha, you're next.
Oh, sorry, do you want me to respond to that now or what? How do you want me to do it?
Well, Dick, did you want Rob to respond or the rest of the group? Just before we move on to Martha?
Either way, you chair it. if it's easier for Rob to respond to comments as we go, rather than lose the train, I'm happy, but either way.
Let's let Rob respond, and then
Okay.
and we'll get a bit of a mood of other people's ideas too, and then. So,
Okay.
Rob, do you want to say anything to that?
All right. Sorry, Martha. I can see you're keen to ask the next one, but I just wanted. It's just that if I'm wanting to make a comment on particular ones, I'll get confused if I if I don't respond immediately. I want to stress, Dick, that this is not just about electing independent MPs, and in fact, I would imagine that maybe only a small percentage of mobilisations at the electorate level would lead to the group putting up an independent MP, as they did in Indi. It would be just when there were really bad ones that would happen. But I would see it as involving a series of more incremental, sort of multifaceted changes, which wouldn't be about replacing an independent MP, or replacing an existing MP with an independent. I'm not sort of talking about getting rid of the party system. I think it could be loosened up a bit. I think one of the reasons why, as I was saying before, the MPs are so influenced by their parties is because they've got a lack of organised influence coming from the electorate level. Yeah. So nature abhors a vacuum, and so if there's not pressures from the electorate to behave in certain ways, then they will just go with what the party's telling it to do. That would be my view, but I'm interested in other people's ideas on this too.
I've got some things to share too, but I'll wait a little while. Martha, maybe you could ask your question or explore what's coming up for you. We can't hear you. You've unmuted yourself, Martha, but we can't hear you, so I don't know what's happening there.
Hello? Oh.
Actually, Martha has typed into the chat box, could you reflect, please, on the implications of your ideas for the ACT multi-member electorates? I think there is some point in concentrating on ACT and also Queensland. Hopefully that's, Martha, what you were wanting to say, but you might have, yeah, she's nodding her head. So. Sorry, we can't hear you. I don't know what's happened to your microphone. Did you want to make any comments about that, Rob?
I must confess, I don't know a lot about the ACT government. I know sort of broadly about its party makeup, and I was very impressed with what it did in moving to 100% renewable energy. And I had heard an interesting talk about that from Shane Rattenbury last year. I know it has a proportional representation, but I honestly haven't really thought this through in the context of a proportional representation system. So I probably couldn't shed more light on it than anyone else, but I can't see why it wouldn't work. The principles of trying to have a more active role in the selection of candidates, of building better communication with candidates, of trying to get some community input into pre-selection could equally apply in that situation as they would in a single member electorate system.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Well, maybe there's others of us here who have some ideas about that. I think Walter had his hand up next. Walter, do you want to say something?
Very briefly, it's two things. One, in the participants window, there's an arrangement where you can raise your hand, which gives the host opportunity to pick the next speaker. My comments are really very, very broad. I think I've been in CAPaD for a while now, and I've had to move on to other things, but I'm still interested in it in principle. There's various estimates out there for the number of people you need in an electorate, say, or in any arena, how many people will lead the rest, and the best estimate I've seen so far is 3.5%. So if you get 3.5% of the, say, the electorate going in a particular direction, then the rest of the electorate will follow. How true that is, I don't know. And if that's some sort of number threshold we need to aim for, then let's, but I'm not quite sure how to do it. What I'm more concerned with, though, is yes, there is polarization, but there's also overcoming people's belief systems and their attitudes. I've got a very good book here, which I've got just recently. I don't know if you can read that. It says How to Have Impossible Conversations, a very practical guide, by two authors, Peter Bagassian and, I can't read the other one backwards, James Lindsay. And they say, just quick blurb on the back, in our current political climate, it seems impossible to have a reasonable conversation with anyone who has a different opinion. This is rather US-centric, but I don't think it's irrelevant to us. Whether you're online, in a classroom, an office, a town hall, just hoping to get through a family dinner with a stubborn relative, dialogue shuts down when perspectives clash. And then these two, they're academics, and they claim great experience in dealing with conversations, with teaching the subtle art of instilling doubts and opening minds. One just quick quote from inside. Socrates says it is better to be refuted than to refute. What he means by this is it is better to stop believing something false than it is to try to help someone else believe something is false. Because this is what you end up with. You attempt to intervene in someone's cognitions, you end up in intervening your own. Now, key point, not everyone will view exposure of a false belief as an opportunity. Most will resist and cling to their beliefs. Many people will become upset. Some may even lash out at you. Exercising your judgment is crucial. So, my experience, I don't think in my reading, it's just pointless really trying to change people's beliefs by coming up and saying, e.g., climate change is real. Then you get the deniers. One question that these fellows suggest is to ask them, what would make you change your mind? And so I think the whole approach they're taking is that you keep asking questions of them until make them think and make them respond, and see whether you can start instilling doubts. Now, after all, it's entirely possible that we're wrong and that we need to change our doubts. We are, after all, trying to appeal to an electorate. Again, this is very broad. It's also rather basic, and I'm not entirely sure how we implement that in our work, whether we as a group need a course, we all buy this book or disseminate bits of it and then study it. So I think so far, my observation of the MPs, the MLAs here, with the pledges that we had them sign in the last election, some of them are just totally resistant. A few are interested, but only sort of. So we're dealing with a lot of very entrenched belief systems. And I think possibly these ideas might be a way to change it. Okay.
Thanks, Walter. Rob, did you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, a couple of things. Yeah, when I was working on the issue of climate change, there was a lot of literature around about how difficult it is to change people's minds. But so I'm aware of that. I suppose a couple of things. One, if you look at the fact that people have changed their minds on a whole range of issues over the years, that must have happened through some sort of process, you know, whether it's on same-sex marriage or on climate change or on capital punishment or what. There have been massive changes in people's views. So if the object of this is to actually just speed those up a bit, I think that's, and to accept that it's not going to be, you're never going to just change people's views overnight. I think it's a worthwhile activity because history has demonstrated that it does produce results. People do change their ideas. Secondly, I don't think that the main objective of the campaign, of mobilisations in individual electorates, is to get people to change their minds on policy issues. I mean, that it's necessary to have robust conversations with people so that can happen, but it's really to get more engagement of people in the process, and also to work on building better communications with the MPs and doing the whole process of selecting and monitoring how they perform differently. So, you know, policy debates about policy will be part of it, but I don't see them, and from my observation of Indi, I don't think they were a huge part of the campaign to actually get a whole bunch of people to think differently. On the question of the critical mass of people, Indi, in an electorate of, say, I don't know, whether, you know, around 100,000, 110,000, there were, at the different election campaigns, there have been 3 election campaigns, between about, you know, 12 and 1,500 people involved. So that's, you know, somewhere around 1%. So they managed through that process to go from a standing start to, you know, getting into power. And in a sense, I see getting rid of the MP as kind of like the nuclear option. I mean, that's something where you have to have a massive campaign. You have to have people really feeling steamed up about things in order to have that sort of result be successful, outcome be successful. What I'm talking about in other electorates is probably much more modest gains. And so you could probably do that with fewer people involved, maybe 100, maybe 500, whatever. But it's a graduated thing where you, I think you can make gains with fairly small numbers of people, but you'd want to try and look like a representative group anyway.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Now, others might have questions. I'll just share what came up for me, Rob, and then as others are wanting to ask. But what I saw had the most potential is this idea of the system seeing itself, because I don't think electorates actually see themselves. When we're constituents of an electorate, where the mystery is of the other people. So when you said there's the average electorate's about 120,000 or 160,000 voters or whatever it was, and the person that we're having go into the parliament is actually a representative of that 110 or 120,000 people. So we don't have to change other people's minds. We just have to make sure that they are representing us. So if there was some agency in the community that could help those 100-odd thousand people see each other, not try and change each other, but just we all could see transparently what all the issues were, like how many schools are in the area, how many churches, how many working organisations, how many businesses, or what they are and what the issues are, instead of just the loud, powerful people controlling what happens in our electorate and the party determining what the policies are of our representative. We all start to see that the issues for us around employment and job security and you know, all the things that concern us are visible to all of us. And all we want to see then is that our local member actually can talk to those issues and represent us on that. And Cathy McGowan is a very good example because of the professional background in community development, rather than being a lawyer or a career politician or an accountant or whatever. You know, that's what gave her legitimacy in being able to represent those ideas in the parliament. So for me, the question then becomes, you know, even for a group like CAPaD, we're just all volunteers trying to get people to be more aware of these issues. What would be the easiest way, without exhausting the efforts of volunteers, to have the local electorate see itself in some way? What would be some tools and processes that could easily happen that build on existing things that are going on, you know, PC meetings at the school and all those types of things. So you don't have to run more meetings, but you have a way of collecting the information so that everybody can see it and the elected representative can see it, and we're all holding ourselves accountable to it. Have you done any thinking about how to do that?
No, I'm just I'm just thinking as you're talking. I think it's a wonderful, you know, you've articulated it really well. It becomes almost a community development exercise then, and a lot of the things that happen might not even happen through the MP. They might happen citizen to citizen, or people might just refer somebody to an organisation that could help them, or a person that could help them, or whatever. And it starts to become a much more, the electorate becomes much more conscious of itself, and what makes up the electorate. I mean, for example, most people don't know the boundaries of their electorates, so they don't know actually who's in it, and the issues that those people are having, or their dreams, or whatever. And this could be a way of making that happen. I mean, in Victoria, I'm not sure. No, I think it's gone interstate now. They've got these things called good karma networks. Now, they're not about politics, but they're about people just doing good things for one another. But and I joined one, although I haven't really been active on it. But it seems to me that they're about people getting to know their electorates as well. And another word that comes to mind for me here is agency. It's the constituents taking agency, a sense of agency of the process, and not treating politics as something that is to be served up to them on a plate. They need to be actively engaged in it, or a proportion of them do, to make it happen well. Is that?
Yeah, and maybe what's coming up for me as you say that is, instead of everybody being a lobbyist for their own perspective,
Yeah.
and the system can see itself,
Yes.
we actually see whose voice is missing.
That's
So
right.
instead of just being self-interested, we actually say, oh, look, we're missing out on the voice of these people.
Yes.
Make sure we get them involved. So we actually become enablers of other voices to be heard, because we're all wanting to see good representation happen. So
Absolutely.
it changes the way we see our role in the political system. Anyway, that's enough for me. Does anybody else want to bring up an issue that's come up for them? Marcus, and then Sue.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. I tried to raise my hand using the technique.
Yeah, actually, it's there, Marcus.
mentioned.
Sorry about that. I can see your hands raised.
I'm not sure if how it works on the other end. Rob, this is my first CAPaD meeting. I think I joined 2 days ago so that I could attend. I'm based in Sydney. Born in UK, lived most of my life in Hong Kong. Been down to Canberra a few times, loved it every time. And I really value what you're doing, which is trying to solve a problem that doesn't just affect Canberra, it affects the whole country, and it affects everybody in the world. And to be honest, most places I've lived. I have friends in Hong Kong now that are, I suppose, regretting having been apathetic about politics all their lives, and they're people losing friends because you're either with us or you're against us. And so it is, and you can read it from what, the books like 1984 and so on. We all know what happens when democracy fails. So I think there's some really powerful ideas here. And so one of the things that I think came to mind when I was listening to Rob is this process that you guys are starting. We actually started 2 days ago in North Sydney. Same sort of number of people, same sort of platform. Everybody was on Zoom, and everybody was very concerned and wondering what to do about it. And I think that, Rob, the fact that you've got a document there that I need to go and check out, for me, the next step would be, what is that toolbox that we can give communities around the country, or around the world for that matter? What is that toolbox? Is it here's 10 steps to setting up a community group that will enable you to express your views and get things changed? So I think that first bullet point, and I don't have your document in front of me anymore, but that first bullet point, the next logical step for me is to put that toolbox together. And I'm sure there's enough people with enough brain power between them in this group that could put that together and flesh that out and say, okay, so if you want to take this to Indi, you want to take it to Chatswood, which is where I live, which is a Liberal seat, you want to take it anywhere in the country, then you can actually go and you can actually take the next step, because it's very difficult for those of us who are not career politicians or lawyers to know what to do about it, and to know put a framework in place to actually achieve some change. It's been, back in my parents' generation, perhaps the church would be a sort of community building influence, or it might be the school. But now, especially in the big cities that I guess I've lived in, everybody's moving around, and I've been here for 5-6 years. That sense of community is not there anymore. And so if I am living where I'm living now, there was no letter that came in that said, welcome to Willoughby Council or welcome to the North Sydney electorate. There was no onboarding process.
Yes.
But when I go to work for a new company, or go to a new university, or I go to a new school, or join a new sports team, there is always a lovely onboarding process where somebody says, welcome, here's a buddy, you know, if you have any questions, go here, go here. But in politics, and the complicating factor is the fact that we've got 3 levels of government here. And so you would ostensibly get 3 letters every time you move house, and you'd say, here's one from the locals, here's one from the state, and here's one from the federal bunch, to telling you, you know, where the boundaries are, what your rights are, what the opportunities are to collaborate. And it's a shame that that doesn't exist. And so I think there is an idea there somewhere around onboarding and even offboarding, you know, like in hospitality, which I did a lot of work in hospitality for a few years. There is always, you know, you come to the hotel, dear Mr. Crowley, how are you today? Tell us about your stay. That is just common sense in business nowadays, but government doesn't have that process. And so is it a process that we could build somehow where, you know, it could be a neighborly thing. Back when I was young in Victoria, we had a neighborhood watch sign that would go outside certain buildings. And it would say, it was all to do with crime prevention and so on, keeping an eye out for your neighbors. But it was all, I think it was led by the police, but it was kind of also led by the community. And I think it might have fallen by the wayside, but I wonder if there is a structure that we could put in place that would be fairly pain-free and cost-effective, or even free, whereby people would welcome people to their community and try and build them into the discussion. So I just wanted to put that out there and see whether that's something that any of you, whether it sparked any ideas, and I'm happy to talk about some other stuff, but I think I've probably spoken enough already.
Thanks, Marcus. That sounds great. Rob, did you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fantastic idea. Whether that's the same organisation as I'm proposing or a different one, it would have to be talked through. But there's certainly a huge need for that. And you should look up. Do you know Good Karma Networks?
Only from listening to you mention it a couple of minutes ago.
Karma, as in the, you know, Karma. Just Google them and you'll see there's about 60 of them now. It was started off in Kensington in Victoria, and they're all about people doing good things for one another. So that might be something that you're interested in. But I agree, there should be much more of a process in communities where people are welcomed into communities, and where they're, maybe when they leave the community, they have a debriefing process, as you suggest. You mentioned, you know, having tools to do this sort of thing, and I think that's really important. And I mentioned some of the tools or resources that might be produced, how to run a kitchen table conversation, how to run a campaign like this overall, pointers for strategy, how to enroll more people, and so forth. But also, I think one of the important things would be to give people permission to do this sort of thing, because people have a kind of inbuilt sense of what's normal behavior and what's not normal behavior. And unless they've seen an example of this happening somewhere else, or unless they've had people come and say to them, hey, why don't you do this? Often people hold back from doing something. There was this terrific video I saw once called The Second Dancer. And it was a video of people at some sort of, you know, country rock festival or folk festival or something. And they were just standing out in this field. And one person started dancing to the music. And for a while, they would dance, quite a long time, they were dancing by themselves. And other people thought, well, is that person a bit weird? You know, they're just dancing by themselves. And then the second person got up and danced, and that made it a bit more normal. And then there was this sort of exponential rate at which other people joined and started dancing. And, you know, I think social movements are like that too. If people get the idea that this is a normal and even admired thing to do, then they're much more likely to do it. So it's about suggesting it to people.
Thanks, Rob. And Sue, you've got your hand up there. Do you want to go next?
Yes, I shall. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rob, for a very interesting set of ideas. My question is really around mobilisation and how to mobilise communities, because in the case of Indi and Warringah, local communities were very much reacting against the local member that they had. And so there was a strong desire to actually, a very clear objective, which was change our local member, something very, very concrete. But the kinds of ideas around governance broadly, which you've been describing, are much more abstract. And I'm wondering if you've actually tried this kind of approach in a community that wasn't reacting against something. And I mean, it's rather leveraging off what Marcus and Mark were talking about as well, but how do you envisage mobilising a community? And are you thinking of having, you know, trying to find at least one community in which to explore this and, you know, refine the tools involved?
Well, as I've said, that I'm interested in seeing it happen wherever people want to do it, and not targeting particular seats. I thought that it probably behoves me to try it in my own electorate, which happens to be Cooper, and our local member is Jed Carney. Now, I actually think Jed Carney is a very good member, and so I wouldn't be countenancing trying to replace Jed Carney, but really helping Jed Carney to represent her electorate better. The short answer to your first question is I haven't done this before, because I've really just thought it. I've just kind of come up with these ideas recently. I have been involved. I've run a kitchen table conversation through the Greens and also through a movement in Victoria called the Purple Sage Project in the 90s. I've had a little bit of campaigning experience through the Greens. So I'm not claiming to have a lot of experience to draw on. I think an important I think the kitchen table conversations are a good way to start, because what they do is they just give people a fairly contained task. You're inviting people to engage in a contained process, and that is to sit for 2 hours and talk about what you want in terms of about your values and how you think politics could be better. And I'm thinking that, well, the experience seems to be that can have a snowballing effect, because you can suggest to other ordinary members of those kitchen table conversations that they go off and host one. They can see that it's not too difficult. And then that creates a stage where, or a process through which people are talking with each other about how they would like society, how they would like politics to work better in their electorate. And then, you know, you can have questions like, what would you like to do to make this happen? So you can sort of gently encourage a proportion of people who have been part of that process to then get actively involved, and stress that, you know, you're not expecting, you don't have particular expectations of those people, and they're doing it as a group and so forth. So I wouldn't want to intimidate people. I wouldn't want to push them beyond their feeling of competence. But together, I think, they say that there's lots of skills and capacities in a large group of people, and you'd want to explore that. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you, yes.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to make a comment or ask a question?
I can see Peter's got his hand up.
Yep, Peter. And then Bob.
Yeah, I mean, this is fascinating, and I'm wondering if this is maybe an appropriate time to share a little bit of what CAPaD's thinking on this is already, because that might enrich and expand the discussion a bit. What do people think about that?
Absolutely.
General nods. Okay, so let's try this. So are you able to see my screen? Is that working at the moment?
Not yet, Peter.
Okay. So let's go back there. Let's go a share screen. I see. Fascinating. Okay, so I'm just going to show you something here. So this takes us to our website. Now this is in the flavour, I think there's a couple of things here. One is people were looking for a toolbox. So on our website, we've actually got some information that you can go and look at kitchen table conversations. And we have a little kit that people can download if they want to tease out our experience with working with kitchen table conversations. So I'll just let you know about that. The other thing we have on our website at the moment is we're involved very much in this idea of how do you work an election? And this idea of the relationship between the representative and the constituents is an important ongoing relationship. And we have come up with this idea of a statement of citizens' expectations, which I'm not going to go through with you now, but we've developed this over the last 12 to 18 months by speaking to people in the street at festivals and by speaking to parliamentarians, by reading the literature, by speaking to academics. And we've come up with this sort of list of things which we think, you know, the representative should be as they're part of the relationship. And at the same time, we've also come up with an idea about what citizens or the community role in the relationship is. So I'm not going to go through this into any sort of fabulous detail at the moment, but it's there on our website if you want to unpack it and have a look at it. And I think this speaks to some extent to some of what Rob is saying, and it complements his ideas. And I think there's some cross-fertilisation that we can work on here to go forward. So I'll just leave it at that for the moment. But I think there's lots of thinking happening in this space. And I think that the idea of it's really about not which party your representative represents, but working out a criteria for who is the best representative in terms of, you know, what you want your representative to be working with you on. And that's a very, I think, useful way of framing it.
Thanks, Peter. And just to let you know, Janet's also had to leave our meeting, but she's left a note in the chat about a group that she's involved in as well. So you might want to read that. Now, I think, Bob, you had the next question or comment?
Just that I spent most of yesterday on Zoom meetings with the group from the Commission for the Human Future, discussing the issue of food security as one of the 10 existential threats to future of human civilization that we're deeply concerned that no governments around the world are taking seriously enough. And it was interesting, we had 40 people involved from around Australia and some New Zealanders and a couple of US people, but the uniform view was that we do not have a parliament that is not locked up by the corporate sector in the needs of the corporate sector for profit from food production and food marketing. And that therefore we have a serious problem to start rethinking the food system as a system that benefits people, that provides livelihoods for farmers, and that provides a general health and nutrition for the community. It seems to me that there's an issue there. I mean, I'd say the issue of activating parliaments in Australia about the existential threats that are threatening us, not just climate change, not just the extinction of species, not just food security, not just artificial intelligence, and all of these things that really are genuinely threatening us. It seems to me these are the kind of unifying things that might well be the product that could generate the sort of pressure initiatives that Rob's talking about.
Thanks, Bob. Rob, did you want to respond to that in any way?
Yeah, just on the, I mean, you talked about how the Parliament is so influenced by corporate interests. I mean, I think it's critical that we do something about that and look at ways to reduce the corporate influence on politicians, particularly through more transparent processes of lobbying to sort of regulate lobbying, and also through all sorts of restrictions on political donations. It seems to me that it's a bit analogous to when you buy a house, you go through an estate agent, and you might think that the estate agent is actually interested in your interests, but they're mainly interested in the interests of the seller, because it's the seller who pays them. And now there's this new occupation that started up, which is buyers agents, who really represent the buyers of houses. And I'm not saying it's exactly like that in politics, but really there are certain people who pay political parties to advance their interests, and so they're going to be disproportionately listening to those people, their constituents. And I just think that we need to do something about that.
Thanks, Rob. We've got 20 minutes left, and we want to share some other things with you before we close. Has anyone else got any other questions or comments?
Could I say that I'm interested in further conversations with people, about what you think of this, or suggestions and so forth, as we've been talking about, but also if any of you want to get involved, because, or even help just in limited ways, because basically this isn't going to work unless I can get a group of people to make it happen. I mean, I'm in a sense in my third age, and I've got lots of time, and I've got good health and so forth. So I'm very, very keen to work on it. But I am very interested in hearing from people. And I, when I talked to Mark earlier, I was a bit reluctant to give my email address, but I think I'll do it anyway. So if you're interested in contacting me, my email address is salterrob51@gmail.com. So salterrob51 is all one word, @gmail.com. And I'd love to hear from you if you wanted to have further discussions about any aspect of this. But by all means, yes, let's move on to other things.
Okay. Anybody else want to add some to this conversation or ask a question? Margaret?
Plaxy's got a hand up.
Plaxy. Yeah, okay,
Yes.
Plaxy.
Oh, I wasn't muted. Sorry. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks very much, Rob. And CAPaD. I just wanted to share my enthusiasm for the kitchen table conversation method, which I've just had a few experiences of through CAPaD and Sea Change here in the ACT. And I have a sense that, so some of the feedback that we've had back from groups who've tried it, or rather from the participants, is there needs to be a sense of something tangible that's going to come out of getting together and talking for a couple of hours about their values and so on. And we haven't found a way to offer anything tangible. An idea that we had was to, this is through my involvement with CAPaD, to create a website that enables people to choose to publicize their small groups' concerns, decisions, values, and so on. which is not terribly tangible, but it's something and that I think would motivate some people to be involved. And we didn't, I don't think we had the resources to maintain such a website within CAPaD. But I wonder whether, thinking about how, if you're able to establish something like this, Rob, in your electorate or in other electorates, I'm wondering whether there might be some kind of funding support from within the from the MLAs or the MPs or from other community groups to help publicise and to help people share the results of their kitchen table conversations, so that I'm imagining some kind of tagging or coding that sort of automatically assesses the points that people make to show trends or something like that. Just an idea that I'd love to be able to develop further.
Yeah, yeah. What they did in Indi was they actually, I mean, as you know, people normally have a scribe, or in some cases it's audio taped, and so they're able to capture the gist of what people are saying, and then in Indi they produced a report, which all of that information was channeled into this report, and that was then presented to the MP and the other candidates, and just generally released on their website. It's available. You can go and see it today if you want to. And so, do you think that would be a sufficient kind of tangible result?
Well, when we did, when CAPaD did a similar thing here in the ACT and produced a report, there were mixed, from my understanding is there were mixed, there was mixed feedback on whether that was substantial enough on its own, because there was, some people expressed a sense that it was just a piece of paper that was then ignored. So that's why I'm thinking something a bit more public that can't be ignored perhaps might be, or finding some real champions within the parliament who would make sure it's ignored as little as possible.
Yeah, well, I mean, the object would be to make your own MP the champion to represent those ideas, I suppose. And you know, it would depend on how much energy the group put into putting over that information to their MP and the other candidates. But certainly I agree with you that so often we do these things and there doesn't seem to be any result. So I think that's really important, what you're suggesting. There was another point I was going to make, about funding. Interestingly, Indi at the beginning, they didn't actually have much external funding. They had a local fundraising to the extent of $7,000 or something. Most of the resources that are going into it are people's volunteer time and just really the use of the internet, which is pretty well free. I mean, it's good to have somebody to make it look very you know, attractive, but the material you're presenting online. But I think that the expenses could be kept to a minimum. But I think it's also good to get funding eventually. But my inclination is to start it and then have something to demonstrate to potential funders that you're actually engaged in something, rather than just it being a good idea that you're asking them to fund.
Thanks, Plaxi. Thanks, Rob. I noticed that Martha's got a hand up again, and so has Marcus. So Marcus, do you want to go first and then Martha?
Thank you, Mark. Sorry, I don't want to take up too much time, but what, where's she gone? Oh, she's gone back to not being on video. Plaxi was talking about, and I think Rob was steering her towards building a prototype of something that you could then say, here you go, this is what we're proposing to do. That's what I do for a living. If anybody needs my help, or even just to bounce some ideas off me in that regard, I'd love to help, because I think the internet has a role to play. And you're right, just having a website with something on it doesn't mean anybody's going to visit it. but it's a start, and at least it's a destination for people to go and educate themselves if they want. But the point that I wanted to make, other than that, I think was and I consider myself fairly well educated and fairly well traveled and fairly interested in politics, but I must admit at the last federal election, I was presented with a piece of paper the size of a bath towel with a number of people to choose from, of whom I had heard of about 3. And I'm talking about the parties, never mind the candidates. And I live in a fairly safe Liberal seat, but I must admit I'd never heard from Trent Zimmerman, and there was a blog article I can share with you later that shows you how misinformed I was. But the difficulty is most people like me will show up at the ballot box and they won't know, even if I've heard of this person, I don't know what this person's stance is on perhaps the 10, 20 things that I care about. Now, there is the ABC Vote Compass application, which some of you may have played with. From what I gather, 4 million of us used that before the last election out of 20 million. So not a drop in the ocean, but by no means was it conclusive. And the good thing about that, if you haven't tried it, is it marries you up, your views and various candidates' views that have been quantified, and it tells you who you should be voting for. So I think there's many missing pieces of the puzzle to solve this problem. And it's nice to hear from everybody here today that there are a few that have already been worked on. So thank you, Peter. I'll definitely check out your kitchen conversations guide. And there will be others besides that, but I think there'll be a number of things that need to be done. And I don't have a whole lot of time nowadays because I'm working full time, but would love to try and help, even if it's not in Sydney.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. I'm sure CAPaD would love to get in touch with you too. Martha, did you want to, or sorry, Rob, did you want to respond to what Marcus said?
I'll just say I'd like to have a conversation, Marcus.
Yeah, okay.
So if you want to send me an email,
Yeah.
I'd love to chat about your offer.
Yeah. And Martha, have you been able to get your microphone to work? Did you want to ask a question or make a comment?
Working now?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, well, I've actually written my comment. It was a comment Plaxi made in passing about champions. And I think it's a crucial idea that needs to be pursued further. I have some reservations about thinking that MPs, however good, can be honest champions because of the binds and gags that party politics puts on them. Somebody mentioned Jed Carney before. I think she's an excellent example of somebody who has to hold her tongue perhaps more often than she'd like to. But I'm just wondering if your group has in fact considered the idea of known figures, champions. I mean, I suppose one that comes to mind for me would be John Stanhope, who knows the political system and so on, and to a certain extent is championing the idea of independence in political representation and responsiveness. So anyway, it's just a general question about whether you've done much work on this.
Thanks, Martha.
I'll just respond. I have. There's no group at the moment. It's just me. So this is a very early stage idea, really. And so I mean, I agree that champions are a good thing to have. And as a complement, really, to popular engagement. I was going to say something else. Anyway, I can't remember what the other point was. Yeah, champions are. Oh, that's right. About Jed Carney. See, I think having a mobilisation in Cooper could strengthen Jed's arm. She could say in caucus and in other fora, this is what my electorate are telling me loud and clear, that we need to be working on these issues, or we need policies in this area, and so forth. I agree, she is a bit hamstrung because she's a bit more progressive than her party, and I would hope that the electorate could support her in the things that she's progressive about.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Martha. Anybody else? We're coming to the last few questions. Anyone else? I'll just share what's coming up for me. To make it easy for people who are busy and haven't got the time, if there was an IT capacity that could create a website that could work for all electorates across Australia with the same platform, and it established a relationship with information in each electorate about what the member has done and voted on, like what you've suggested, Rob, and their commitment to the community. So it was an open statement about their commitment to the community. The community could feed information in, but based on not just vested interests, but on the statistics of the community. You know, the Bureau of Stats would have it, and other sources of independent data. And then people could host kitchen table conversations and put it there in terms of what was serving the common good of this electorate. So it wasn't just batting for your own interests. And that was an open source negotiation in every electorate in Australia on a common platform where people could see that play out and be accountable for it. That's just what's coming up for me.
Could you write those things down? And send it to me, because I want to make sure. I think that's good. And I mean, I had envisaged there would be a website, but I hadn't thought about it in terms of some of those features. Yeah. So if you could just note that down, I'd be very interested to see it.
And it sounds like Marcus might even have some experience in that area as well. But maybe Peter.
Just a clarification. So Rob, are you thinking about doing something just in Cooper, or are you thinking about a national thing?
Well, I'm thinking about a national thing. I mean, it sounds grandiose, but since it's just me at the moment. But my reason for taking action in Cooper, considering taking action in Cooper, is really just to practice what I'm preaching, and that is to do something in your own electorate. And I think that there is value in doing it in any electorate, even if you've got a pretty good MP already. In the ways that I've described, it could help to strengthen Jed Carney's arm in what she's doing and so forth. And she could learn more about the electorate through this group in the ways that Mark described earlier, where the whole electorate becomes more sort of self-reflective.
Yeah.
Peter, did you want to say anything else about the MLA statements that CAPaD's doing?
I'm just writing down your ideas. But look, I think what I might do is very quickly take people through what we're planning for the next election. The ACT has 3 federal electorates and 5 ACT Legislative Assembly electorates. And we are doing what we're doing in the ACT across the federal and the territory level. And I can't speak for CAPaD, but it's an interesting idea to think about what we might be able to do to help develop this at a national level. I think if you do something in Cooper, Marcus, if you do something in North Sydney, and other people start doing something around Australia, it might be worth trying to work out some linkage across Australia so we can feed ideas and learn experience from each other, given that Indi, Wentworth and Warringah have all had some experience in doing this as well. And I think the idea is that, I think Rob's point that the political party is less important than the candidate is something that CAPaD would strongly support, because if our theory of change is that if we get the right candidate in there who develops a good relationship with their electorate, then we're going to get better government. And I think we would go that. So I suppose that then leapfrogs us into what what we're doing for the electorate here in the ACT. So again, if we go to our website, you'll see there is a space on our website where we're running some stuff for the election. What we're trying to do is we want to help voters be able to compare candidates sort of in a rudimentary way like we have been talking about. We're particularly focusing on, you know, how they're qualified to represent you, how they're going to protect and promote good government, and how they're going to support public input to decision-making and policy. And we, as I said, I've shown you this link to the website where we, if it works, My internet is being very slow. So we've got, this is the introductory page. We've then got a website where we put the candidates up. So for each of the electorates people can go to their electorate and they can look at the candidates that they know about. And if the candidates have put in a statement, they can then look at that statement that the candidate has put in that answers those questions. So this is what we are doing in the ACT for the ACT election. We did it for the last federal election and we did it for the previous ACT election. And and this is our way of beginning to get voters to begin to think about election slogan, choosing their candidates carefully. So for people who are in the ACT, we would invite you to visit our electorate and to put pressure on visit our website to see what the candidates are saying. And when candidates are doing their electioneering thing, we would invite you to put pressure on them to fill in the statement and add it to our website. So I'll leave it there, but that's sort of what we're up to in the ACT. And I think this is something which other electorates could take up and also do within their electorate. It doesn't take a lot of energy to make a fairly simple website like that. It's, if you know how to play with WordPress, it's pretty straightforward. If you don't, find somebody who does. All right. Thank you, Mark. I'll leave it there.
Okay. Well, look, we're just coming into our last 5 minutes, and I just think we should probably finish with if anyone wants to make an offer or a commitment to how they're going to follow up from this meeting, you could just speak to that in the group. But if you've also got a suggestion on what CAPaD could focus its attention on in the ACT, you could put it in the chat box. And also, if you're outside the ACT, what's something that you think we could take forward or share with Rob or with each other, and we'll offer to share all of this with you all after this meeting. What's just one simple next step that we could do to advance these ideas? And if you just reflect on that for you and put it into the chat, we'll just have a cascade of input into the chat to finish off with. But does anyone want to speak to conclude this session in any way about an offer that they want to make or a needs that they have? We'll just take a few more moments just to reflect your ideas and what's one thing CAPaD could do or one thing that you could do that could benefit these ideas being advanced around Australia and in the ACT. Just put it into chat now. And Rob, on behalf of everybody, I'd just like to say thank you very much for sharing your ideas with us. And I think we'll continue an ongoing relationship and conversation, not only with you, but it's lovely to hear what Marcus is doing up in North Sydney as well. And for those of us who haven't even spoken this afternoon, if any of you want to share anything and you want to stay in touch, please contact us. We'd love to find ways to advance these ideas and find where your energy fits into this as well. So much gratitude to you all, and I'll just you can open up the mics to say goodbye to everybody.
Have you got time for two more comments? Yeah, it's been great to be talking to you all, and I look forward to some follow-up conversations and some of those chat comments feeding through. I'm sorry if I didn't orientate this enough towards the Canberra situation. I saw you more as a sort of a group of people who are interested in democracy on which I could bounce this idea off. So I don't have any special insights for Canberra, but I'm very interested in keeping in touch with what's happening in Canberra. Just one other thing, and that's a specific comment about political parties, because people have talked about the strength of political parties in influencing and sort of reining in MPs. Political parties, I don't think, are rigid. I mean, they change over time, and one of the things that changes them is who's actually in them. Who are the members of parliament who are in power at the moment? And I think that we should be trying to get good people, better people into power, or make the people who are in office better able to represent their electorates, and that can in fact change political parties.
What a pleasure.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks everybody. Or does anyone want to say anything else before we close? If you do need to go, you can head off. Anyone else needs to speak can go now.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, Martha. Yep, bye.
Martha. Thank you very much, Rob, for taking this up. I've found your insights very valuable.
Thanks, Petra.
All right.
Okay, bye everybody.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Rob.
Bye. Bye all.
Bye.
Thank you all. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, and go well.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.
Bye.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.